The U.S. and Germany are urging their citizens in Afghanistan not to travel to Kabul airport, with the U.S. citing potential security threats at the gates. Several people have died in the chaos there, and the Pentagon has confirmed reports of Taliban fighters beating and harassing those in the crowds. The U.S. is considering calling in commercial airlines to help airlift out the thousands of people waiting to leave.
The situation grows more dire by the day for those in Afghanistan trying to escape life under Taliban rule. Thousands of people gather outside the airport in Kabul, as they have for days, in terrible, crushing conditions and searing temperatures. But the situation is no easier or less dangerous at night. Reporters say dozens of people have now been killed outside the airport compound. And it's not just those trying to leave the country suffering. With banks still closed, the country's economy has stalled. People nationwide are reaching breaking point. For many in the western city of Herat, poverty is now their biggest fear.
In Afghanistan, things were expensive. There was a war, and now things have become even more so. None of the authorities have paid any attention to this. Our people are facing unemployment, poverty, and misfortune. On top of that, there's war and suffering too. People are going abroad because of unemployment and increased prices. The government has ignored this problem.
But the question now is what kind of government will be formed? On Saturday, Taliban's co-founder Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar flew into Kabul for talks with jihadi leaders, elders and politicians. But forming some kind of administration could take quite a while. And while the West says it does have contact with the Taliban, it does not officially recognize them as a government.
We do have operational contacts with the Taliban at the moment, being in the moment of crisis, because we need, for example, to discuss in these difficult times how we can facilitate it for people in Kabul to come towards the airport. There are no political talks with the Taliban. There is no recognition of the Taliban.
Meanwhile, those Afghans who made it out of the country are making their way around the world. The US is flying many of those airlifted out to an American airbase in southern Germany. They're being processed and prepared at the Ramstein airbase for their onward journey to the United States. While their temporary accommodation is not ideal, the conditions are still a lot better than those outside Kabul airport, where people continue to hope that they too can make it out.
Franz Marty has been covering the fall of Afghanistan for us from Kabul. Franz, greetings again. Several people have been killed in the chaos at Kabul airport. What more do you know?
Unfortunately, this is not a new development. It started from the first day of the evacuation operation. It was often hard to tell how they were exactly killed. Most were arguably trampled in stampedes or pushed against walls and died of that. There have been reports that some might have died of warning shots fired into the air, but at least I could not verify the latter. So chaotic scenes and hard to say what exactly happened to them, but there have been fatalities, unfortunately.
Okay. I'm curious, the co-founder of the Taliban, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, is in Kabul with the intention to map out an inclusive government. To be clear, what precisely does he mean by inclusive?
That is not clear so far, because the Taliban, as always, and as also on other matters, they repeat this talking point without really clarifying it. So there's no official statement what inclusive exactly means. However, it should be noted that this doesn't have to mean inclusive. For example, in 2020, a speech of a Taliban leader stated that inclusive means more or less to give people that repent from the former government, that acknowledge that they had made a mistake, to give them minor positions in the government, but that it will be the Taliban that call all shots. So it could be that or something a little bit more inclusive, but I wouldn't expect too much on this front. After all, the Taliban have won militarily.
Understood. Franz, stay with us for a moment. We want to clarify to our viewers that there's one part of Afghanistan not controlled by the Taliban, the Panjshir Valley northeast of Kabul, which has been commandeered by the son of a legendary fighter who successfully defended the mountainous region against past attacks by both the Soviets and the Taliban.
Ahmad Massoud was born in Panjshir province, northeast of Kabul. Its steep mountains and narrow valleys have kept its population relatively safe through decades of war. The Soviet Union came with tanks and bombers and couldn't seize control. Even the Taliban were kept out during the civil war of the 1990s. Now it's the last Taliban-free area of the country. Massoud's father, Ahmad Shah Massoud, also known as the Lion of Panjshir, is a national hero in Afghanistan. For 22 years he fought for his province, eventually co-founding the anti-Taliban Northern Alliance. In 2001, Massoud warned the world that Osama bin Laden might use Afghanistan as a base to launch terrorist attacks. 2 days before the World Trade Center collapsed, he was killed by al-Qaeda agents posing as journalists.
We still remember the French men.
But his legacy didn't die with him. His son, Ahmad Massoud, says he is ready to follow in his father's footsteps. Like his father, he is calling on Western nations to help, saying his forces need ammunition and other supplies. Massoud isn't the only big name holding out in Panjshir. Amrullah Saleh, first vice president in the recently ousted government, has also taken refuge in the province. Saleh has said that he is legally in charge of the country. Clarity. As per the Constitution of Afghanistan, in absence, escape, resignation, or death of the president, the first vice president becomes the caretaker president. I am currently inside my country and am the legitimate caretaker president. I am reaching out to all leaders to secure their support and consensus. But even with the Constitution and the legacy of a famous anti-Taliban fighter on their side, analysts say the Panjshir holdouts are unlikely to present much of a challenge to the Taliban. Massoud has a famous name but few allies, and so far the Western countries haven't shown any signs that they will support an armed resistance.
Franz, those fighters there in Panjshir, are they the most viable resistance in Afghanistan, and how far-reaching is their influence?
They are the most viable one because they're currently like the only organized one. What the problem is that they control only little territory and have not that much men. However, the bigger problem might be when Ahmad Massoud's father resisted, they had like other territory that bordered Tajikistan. They had supply lines to other countries. Now they're surrounded by Taliban, which makes resupply, for which Ahmad Massoud called, much more difficult. That said, to just discard them is also easy, but shouldn't be done because like in the late 90s, Ahmad Massoud's father's forces also hold out against a superior Taliban force. Plus, in addition, 20 years ago, no one took the Taliban seriously, and now here we are 20 years later, and they have conquered the country. So right now, it's a small resistance, but it is there, and it cannot just be discarded.
That's Franz Marti in Kabul. Again, many thanks, Franz.